Right now, we are in with our editor-at-large, John Kingston, joining us bright and early for you. John's out at the TCA conference this morning out in Las Vegas. John, welcome to FreightWaves Now this morning. Before we dig into what you're doing at the conference, let's start with the big news of the day surrounding AB5.
Yeah, well, what I wanted to do was I had targeted a story on AB5 because the Supreme Court's next session, of course, starts the first Monday in October. That's always when it starts. And what we have sitting at the Supreme Court right now is the appeal of the California Trucking Association to block AB5. If the Supreme Court does not review the earlier appellate court decisions that actually would allow AB5 to go through in the state in the trucking sector, then immediately, as soon as they deny review, AB5 would be the law of the land. What I learned were several things. Number one is that nobody is expecting a decision next Monday, a week from today, first Monday in October, because there actually are still deadlines for filing briefs. So this is going to come down the road. Of course, nobody can really know when. The other thing I found was that the Cal Cartage case, which is a state case that also turned on the same question about the legality of AB5 in California trucking, also is requesting a review in the Supreme Court. So those two cases are obviously linked, and it's going to probably be a while before the Supreme Court comes down with its decision. What that means is that the injunction that is now 18 months, no more than that, about 20 months old, that is blocking AB5 from being implemented in trucking in the state will stay in effect until the Supreme Court denies review, or obviously if it accepts review, then the injunction stays in place. And I spoke to one attorney who laid out the scenario in which they accept review of Cal Cartage and CTA, and then we have another several months for arguments, and then the court doesn't even finish it by the end of the term in June, and then we're into next term, which would start a year from now. So the point being that the disappearance of AB5, the implementation of AB5 in California is pretty far away.
So John, sounds like there is still a long way to go, just as you mentioned. Can you talk to us about what the implications of this means from not just California, but the rest of the country?
Well, there's really no implication for the rest of the country. I mean, this is a California law. There's always been a lot of talk about, well, what if they try to do AB5 with the ABC test the ABC test that defines independent contractors? What if they try to do it in other states? And there have been attempts, but so far nothing's gone anywhere near as long as California. Let's remember, AB5 is in effect in California, but there really were two industries that were targeted the most by the sponsors of it. One was gig drivers, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash. That was overturned by a vote in November by the population, by a referendum. However, a court then overturned that vote. Right now, that is stayed. So Uber, Lyft, et cetera, are not being impacted by AB5. The second industry was trucking. And it's never been effective in trucking because an injunction against it was handed down on New Year's Day, 2020, which was the first day it was to go in effect. AB5 is in effect in other industries, but then at the same time, they found that there was such a mess that the legislature passed a whole bunch of exemptions, different industries that are no longer affected. So I'll be honest with you, I don't know how much impact AB5 is having on a day-to-day basis when you take the two industries that the two big industries, gig drivers and truckers that are not being affected by it now, and then you put in all the exemptions that the legislature has passed because that wasn't their target.
John, when the Supreme Court decides whether or not to hear these cases, do they pick them based on how large scale they would affect people? So I guess what I'm asking, is there a chance that they would decide to not hear it because it is only a law that would affect California? Or would they choose to hear it because it would possibly set a precedent for these other states to make laws that are the same way?
That's a really good question, and I'm going to kind of modify my answer that I gave to Anthony. The legal issue at question is whether a law that comes from the 90s called F4A, the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act, bars implementation of something like AB5. The F4A law prohibits a state from taking actions that would affect rates or services in transportation and essentially blot out some of the impact of F4A. So there are significant legal questions here. It's not just a question of is AB5 a good idea? The real question for both Cal Cartage and the real question for the California Trucking Association case on AB5 is, does F4A preempt a law like AB5? So there are significant legal questions here. The legal history of F4A preemption is pretty significant. So that would be the question that would be addressed by the court. That's why I have to say, when this first started, I'm hardly a Supreme Court expert, but I kind of figured, well, maybe they're not going to take this because, of course, the Supreme Court only accepts review of about 1.5% of all the cases put before it. When you look at the legal questions here, they are pretty significant, and they do deal with a real question of federalism. So, given that, I don't know. My thoughts that the Supreme Court might take on the CTA and the Cal Cartage case have risen considerably.
So, John, when there are decisions like these being made, and as you outlined here, there's a long runway for these to actually go into effect, we see businesses and industries actually adjust and plan around it and find maybe workarounds or loopholes. Are you seeing any potential workarounds or loopholes or potential adjustments that people are already starting to make or even talk about?
Yeah, that was really part two of the story that went up this morning, which is, what are they going to do if AB5 becomes the law of the land? And the traditional independent contractor model is effectively, I'll say it's effectively banned. We really haven't mentioned this in this interview, what AB5 does, but without going into too much detail, it makes it very, very difficult for a trucking company to hire independent contractors. So what to do? There's a whole cornucopia of suggestions, and nobody really knows for sure whether these legally would work. One would be to turn your drivers into employees, which is really what the sponsors want. And that's not going to happen. It's very clear that the trucking, just the nature of trucking business with its ups and downs, to say everybody, well, I'm just going to increase my employee, my pool of employees. That's what they would like. That's not going to happen. One model that's been discussed would be to take, if you're a trucking company, basically just become a brokerage company. Because, of course, most of these companies have brokerage divisions anyway. So you would just expand that, and you would move your freight, or you would move your freight through your brokerage division. The idea being that since trucking is no longer your primary responsibility, your primary activity, you don't actually put trucks on the road yourself, it's okay then to hire an independent contractor to do so. There's another model where the truckers are all become LLCs or corporations, and then you're not hiring them as 1099 employees, as temporary contractors or independent contractors, and you're paying money to a company to get a service done. None of these have been legally tested. I would imagine that if AB5 becomes implemented in the California trucking business, what will happen is companies will try these various routes to hire independent contractors. The state will sue them. That'll go to court, and they'll battle that out for several years. So the amount of litigation that's going to be generated by AB5, particularly if it is implemented in trucking in the state, is just enormous. This will drag on for a long, long time.
Absolutely. John, that full story is up on FreightWaves.com right now. It went up at 7 a.m. this morning. But let's take a quick turn for the end of this interview. Talk about the Truckload Carriers Association. You're there in Las Vegas for their conference this week. What are you going to be doing? What are you going to be covering? What are you most excited about?
Well, first of all, I'm very excited to be back on the road again. The Truckload Carriers Association meeting in Orlando in 2020 was the first week of March. And, the world started to get a lot of concern there about the pandemic. After I left that meeting, I went to Chattanooga and left there on March 6th and flew home and have not traveled again for work. And so I'm just very excited to be here. Just kind of ironic that it is once again the TCA that I'm at. So they've got a good turnout here. I think it's over 800 people. They sold out their exhibition space. And I've already got one story up. It's an interview. Well, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. It's going to be up soon. It's an interview with Dan Clark, who is the head of the trucking or the transportation division at BMO, the former Bank of Montreal, known as BMO. They are the biggest lender to the trucking industry in North America. They come out with their quarterly earnings. The whole bank does every quarter, and we always write about them because they break out numbers on transportation. And I've always felt that those numbers are absolutely tremendous barometers. Kaylee, I think we talked about this several weeks ago. Tremendous barometers on the health of the industry. So I talked to Dan. We talked mostly about his business. Obviously he's very bullish, but they're not really changing anything. They're not going crazy just because the market is so strong. And I've got several other stories and interviews to work on, and expect to have a lot out of here. It's a great meeting, some really robust discussion, and already you can hear the same themes are kind of over and over. It's a great market. We need labor. That's if I can't take away anything else, it's that.
Awesome, John. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's great to have you. Of course, we'll be watching for all of your coverage coming out of the conference. Go give John a follow on Twitter if you aren't already, and you can catch his stories coming out as well.
Yeah, I have been live tweeting at John H. Kingston on Twitter from TCA.
I'm getting my Twitter back just to watch John tweet. Let's do this. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.